Morning came slowly, the sun struggling to filter through the dense canopy above. Mist hung low over the forest floor, wrapping the trees and the train in a shroud of gray. They gathered their gear and approached the locomotive with caution. The metal was cold and slick with dew, and vines clung to every surface, weaving in and out of broken windows and rusted doors. The team moved carefully, testing each step. It was clear that the train had been abandoned for a long time, yet the interior seemed almost preserved, untouched by the chaos of the jungle around it. The first carriage they entered was dark, filled with the smell of damp metal and rotting wood. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rows of seats coated in dust and leaves. The upholstery was torn, and the floor was littered with small debris, but there was something hauntingly familiar about the scene. It was as if time had paused the moment the train stopped moving, leaving everything exactly as it had been decades ago. Each of them felt it, the strange, heavy silence that made every step sound loud and deliberate. As they moved further inside, the sense of discovery grew. There were old suitcases stacked in corners, some open, revealing clothes and personal belongings. Journals, photographs, and letters were scattered on the floor, their edges yellowed with age. The team picked up a few of the items, reading carefully. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and sometimes hurried. Each page told fragments of stories, letters never sent, notes about family and travel, sketches of landscapes no one alive had seen. He felt a shiver run down his spine. These were real lives, frozen in time, and they had been left behind in the middle of the jungle for reasons unknown. The deeper they went, the stranger the train became. In the next carriage, there were signs that it had carried something more than passengers. Crates, heavily reinforced and sealed, lined the walls. The markings on them were faded, but there was a sense of purpose behind their placement. Whoever had loaded these crates had done so carefully, ensuring they remained secure. He couldn't see inside them, but he could sense the weight of the mystery. What had been so important that it required this kind of secrecy? And why had the train been abandoned before it reached its destination? The biologist in the group paused frequently, pointing out plants that had grown through broken windows and along the floor, almost claiming the train as part of the jungle itself. Small insects scuttled across rusted surfaces, and occasional small animals darted away as they entered each carriage. The jungle had been slowly swallowing the train, but it had not destroyed it. It had preserved it in a strange way, holding it in a delicate balance between decay and survival. The team felt that balance keenly. They were outsiders stepping into a world the forest had protected for decades. In one carriage, they found an old dining area. The tables were set with plates and cutlery, tarnished and covered in layers of dust. Some plates still held remnants of food, dried and unrecognizable after years of exposure. The thought of the passengers who had eaten here, who had been frozen in the middle of their journey, made their hearts ache. It was eerie to imagine them walking these halls, laughing, talking, unaware that the world outside was about to forget them entirely. The carriage felt almost sacred, a museum of human presence in the middle of a living forest. As they moved further, they discovered the first real sign of danger, or at least the sense of it. In one corner, a crate had been broken open, and the contents scattered across the floor. It looked as if someone had tried to take something, then fled in a hurry. There were scratch marks on the metal walls, deep grooves that suggested force. No one spoke at first, each member of the team feeling the tension in the air. The forest outside was alive with the usual sounds, but inside the train the silence was heavy, pressing down on them. He felt the hair on his arms rise. The train was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had caused fear long before they arrived. The local guide spoke quietly, reminding them to be careful and to respect the space they were entering. "This is not just a building," he said. "It is a place where people disappeared, where history stopped. The forest let it sleep, and now we are awake in its presence." His words lingered in the air, and they all moved slower, more deliberately, careful not to disturb what had been left behind. It was clear that the train had been abandoned suddenly without planning, leaving an air of mystery that seemed almost tangible. Hours passed as they explored carriage after carriage. Each space offered new clues and raised more questions. Maps of regions long forgotten, notebooks filled with coordinates and strange symbols etched into walls and windows, all hinted at something larger than a simple passenger train. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking at the remnants of a story that had been deliberately hidden, a chapter of history that someone had tried to erase. But why and who? These questions pushed them forward, curiosity stronger than fear, guiding them deeper into the heart of the mystery. By late afternoon, they reached the last visible car of the train. It was different from the others, larger with a heavy metal door that looked reinforced. Unlike the other carriages, this one seemed untouched by the jungle. Vines did not climb its sides, and rust had barely reached it. It gave the impression of purpose, a deliberate attempt to protect whatever was inside. The team paused at the door, exchanging looks of anticipation and unease. Whatever waited beyond that threshold, it had been meant to remain hidden, meant to be forgotten, and now they were standing in front of it, ready to find out the truth. He reached out and ran his fingers along the metal, feeling its cold, unyielding surface. There was a sense of history in the grooves and scratches, a weight that told him this was no ordinary train. The team gathered around, flashlights casting long shadows across the floor. The moment felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. No one spoke, each member lost in their own thoughts, imagining the stories locked behind the door. They had come looking for adventure, but what they were about to uncover could change everything they thought they knew about the past. Before opening the door, they carefully inspected the surroundings. The forest was quiet, almost expectant. Birds had fallen silent, and the usual rustle of leaves had paused. It was as if nature itself was waiting for the secrets inside to be revealed. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension tighten in his chest. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment when the legend became real. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the handle, his fingers trembling slightly as he twisted it. The door resisted at first, then creaked open with a long, haunting groan. The interior of the last carriage was darker than any of the others. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by their flashlights, making the space feel both vast and claustrophobic at the same time. The air smelled of metal and old wood mixed with something faintly sweet, almost like decay preserved in amber. As their eyes adjusted, they began to see the contents of the carriage. Crates carefully arranged filled the space. Each was heavy, secured with locks and reinforced with metal bands. Some were marked with symbols they couldn't recognize, while others bore faded labels indicating fragile or valuable contents. It was immediately clear that this was no ordinary cargo. The team worked carefully, examining the crates from the outside. There was a sense of importance, a deliberate effort to conceal and protect whatever was inside. The biologist whispered, almost to herself, about how strange it was for nature to leave this space untouched, a small island of human intent preserved amidst the overwhelming jungle. He couldn't help but feel the same way. The train had been abandoned, but someone had taken care to make sure the last carriage remained undisturbed, almost as if it were waiting for them, waiting to be discovered by the right eyes. Hours passed as they documented and examined everything they could without breaking the seals on the crates. Questions raced through their minds. Why was this cargo so important? Who had sent it? And most importantly, why had the train been abandoned before it reached its destination? The forest outside seemed to press in, its thick canopy blocking the sun, adding to the sense of isolation. They were alone in the middle of history, stepping into a story that had been frozen for decades. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly decided to set up camp inside the train. It was safer than the dense forest outside, and it allowed them to stay close to the mysterious cargo. They ate in silence, the weight of discovery pressing on their minds. None of them slept easily that night. Every creak of the train, every rustle of leaves outside made them jump. But even in fear, there was excitement. They had found something incredible, something the world had never seen, and the anticipation of what lay ahead kept them awake, planning the next steps, imagining the stories hidden in the last carriage. By the time morning came, they knew that their journey had only just begun. The train had revealed its presence and they had glimpsed its secrets, but the full truth was still locked inside the last carriage. Whatever was inside, it had been hidden for a reason, and now it was their responsibility to uncover it. The team looked at one another, a silent understanding passing between them. They had stepped into a mystery decades in the making, and they were determined to see it through no matter the challenges that lay ahead. He had always been drawn to the unknown, to places where maps ended and stories began. From the time he was a child, he had a fascination with forgotten worlds, ruins swallowed by forests, ships lost at sea, and towns that had vanished from history. But nothing had captured his imagination quite like the Amazon. Its vast green expanse seemed to promise secrets, stories, and mysteries that had never been touched by human hands. He had heard whispers, tales from locals and old explorers about a train that had disappeared decades ago, hidden somewhere deep in the jungle. Most dismissed it as a legend, a story to entertain travelers or scare children. But he didn't dismiss it. Something about it felt real. Something about it called to him. The idea had taken root months ago. He spent nights poring over old maps, comparing them with modern satellite images, trying to make sense of cryptic notes and faded lines. The train had no official record in government archives. There were no photographs, no newspaper stories, nothing that could confirm its existence beyond the words of villagers in scattered communities along the rivers. Yet every hint he found made the puzzle more intriguing. Every tiny piece suggested that there was a train, abandoned and forgotten somewhere deep in the rainforest, carrying secrets that the world had never seen. Preparing for the expedition had been harder than he expected. The Amazon was not forgiving. Supplies had to be meticulously planned. Food that would last, water filters, medical kits, machetes for clearing paths, and equipment to protect them from the unpredictable jungle. He knew the dangers: venomous snakes that could strike without warning, insects that could make the nights unbearable, sudden storms that could turn rivers into raging torrents. But it was the unknown that excited him the most, not the danger. The thrill of discovering something no one had ever seen, the chance to step into a story that had been frozen in time, was worth every risk. When he finally set foot in the dense greenery, the sheer scale of the forest struck him. The trees towered above like ancient guardians, their leaves forming a thick canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was heavy with humidity, rich with the scent of wet earth and the faint, sweet smell of flowers he couldn't name. Sounds surrounded him everywhere: the distant roar of waterfalls, the constant hum of insects, birds calling out in sharp, unfamiliar cries. Each step was both an adventure and a challenge, as roots and vines tangled around his feet, and the ground seemed almost alive, squelching beneath his boots. He wasn't alone. A small team had joined him, each chosen carefully for their skills and experience. There was the geographer, who could read the terrain and navigate without a compass, the biologist who could identify dangerous plants and animals, and the local guide, who had spent years wandering the jungle and knew its rhythms like the back of his hand. Together they formed a group that could survive the forest, but even they were not immune to its overwhelming presence. Each day tested their endurance, patience, and courage. The first days were slow and exhausting. They moved along narrow paths, sometimes barely wide enough for a single person, surrounded by a sea of green. The sun barely reached them through the canopy, and the forest floor was slippery and uneven. Every sound was amplified: the crack of a branch underfoot, the splash of a fish in a river, the sudden rustle of leaves as an unseen animal passed nearby. Nights were worse. The darkness was complete, broken only by the flicker of their lanterns. Strange sounds filled the air: the screech of monkeys, the croak of frogs, and occasional distant howls that made everyone tense. Sleep was hard to come by, but they had no choice. They needed to conserve energy for the days ahead. Despite the challenges, there were moments of wonder that reminded them why they were there. Birds of every color imaginable flitted through the canopy, their calls a symphony of sound. Butterflies, almost impossibly large and vibrant, danced around them as they pushed through the foliage. Once they came across a massive tree whose trunk was wider than a small house. It was hollow at the base, and inside, small streams of water had carved tiny channels through the soil. They stopped for hours, simply staring, letting the beauty of the forest sink in. It was easy to forget for a moment the dangers, the sweat, and the exhaustion. As they moved deeper into the forest, the sense of mystery grew. The locals they had spoken to before the expedition had told stories of strange noises at night, of sudden clearings where travelers had disappeared, of shadows that moved between the trees without explanation. Most of these tales were dismissed as superstition, but he couldn't help feeling a chill whenever he thought about them. There was something about the forest that felt alive, almost aware of their presence. He would often pause, listening to the rhythm of the jungle, trying to sense patterns, trying to understand what the forest wanted to show him. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they stumbled upon something unexpected: the faint outline of a path not made by nature. It was narrow, overgrown, and almost invisible, but there was a regularity to it, straight lines that didn't belong to the chaos of the jungle. Excitement surged through the team. Could it be? Was this the first sign of the train? They followed the path cautiously, machetes clearing vines that had grown over it, hearts pounding with anticipation. Every step felt like stepping into history, into a story that had been waiting for decades to be discovered. The night fell quickly, and they set up camp near the path. They sat around a small fire, speaking in hushed voices, the crackling flames reflecting their mixture of excitement and nervousness. None of them slept easily. The forest seemed different at night, the shadows longer, the noises sharper. He lay awake thinking about what they might find tomorrow. The train was no longer a rumor. It felt real, tangible, waiting for them just beyond the horizon. At dawn, they resumed their journey, the forest slowly waking around them. Birds began their morning chorus, insects buzzed with renewed energy, and the damp earth released its earthy aroma. The path led them deeper into the trees, twisting and turning, sometimes vanishing only to reappear a few meters later. Hours passed, and the anticipation built like a drumbeat in his chest. Every rock, every fallen branch, every bend in the path seemed charged with meaning. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, they saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a shape that seemed almost impossible in the dense greenery. As they moved closer, the outline became clear, a massive, rusted locomotive partially hidden by vines and trees. The train had been abandoned for decades, yet it still held a presence that was impossible to ignore. Its metal sides were corroded, paint peeling, windows broken, but there was something almost majestic about it, as if it were a monument to a story long forgotten. They stood in silence for a moment, taking it in. The forest had hidden it well, but it had not destroyed it. It was waiting for someone to find it. He felt a mixture of awe, fear, and excitement. This was it, the beginning of the journey that could change everything. The train was more than metal and wood. It was a time capsule, a mystery waiting to be solved, and he was the first to step into its shadow in decades. The team approached cautiously, knowing that the jungle could conceal dangers even in the smallest corners. Every step brought new discoveries, strange symbols etched into the metal, old cargo containers with faded labels, and footprints that suggested someone or something had been here long after the train was abandoned. The air felt heavier, charged with the weight of history. He ran his fingers along the rusted edges, imagining the people who had once traveled in these carriages, the secrets they might have carried, and the stories that had never been told. As the sun dipped again, casting long shadows across the forest floor, he knew that this was only the beginning. The train had secrets that could shock the world if they were revealed. But first they had to uncover them step by step, room by room, carriage by carriage. And deep down he understood that what they found could change their lives forever. The Amazon had kept its secret for decades, hidden from history and humanity, but now it had chosen to reveal a part of itself. And he was ready to listen. The team spent the night near the train, their campfires flickering weakly against the thick darkness of the jungle. None of them slept well. The sounds of the forest had changed. There was a weight in the air, a quiet that didn't belong. The usual hum of insects and birds seemed muted, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. They were close to something extraordinary, something that had been hidden for decades, and the thought made their hearts beat faster. The train was no longer just a story. It was real, and it was waiting for them. Windows cast long beams of light across the dusty floor. Every particle seemed to float lazily in the golden glow, making the carriage feel almost magical, like a hidden world frozen in time. The team had spent hours planning the next steps. They knew that what lay ahead could change everything they thought they understood about the train, and possibly even the world. He stood at the entrance of the last carriage, staring at the rows of crates and wondering where to begin. Each crate was heavy and reinforced, marked with strange symbols that none of them recognized. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the train itself were aware that someone had finally reached its heart. He ran a hand along the metal, feeling the cold ridges, imagining the hands that had loaded these crates so long ago. Whoever had packed them had clearly wanted to hide something important from the rest of the world. The team gathered in a small circle, whispering ideas about which crates to open first. The guide suggested starting with the ones closest to the entrance, reasoning that if anything dangerous or fragile lay inside, it would be better to find it before moving deeper. The biologist examined the labels and markings, trying to decipher anything meaningful. Most were faded or covered in rust, but a few had symbols that hinted at fragility, warnings, or even secrecy. The tension was palpable. Every movement felt deliberate, like stepping through history without disturbing its balance. They began carefully prying open the first crate. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the carriage, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Inside were objects that at first seemed ordinary: ceramic vases, bundles of documents, and old scientific instruments. But even these everyday items carried a sense of history, a feeling that they had belonged to people who had believed their cargo was worth protecting at all costs. Each item told a story, even silently. The notes on paper, the careful wrapping of fragile objects, the way things were stacked with precision, all spoke of someone who had cared deeply about what they were transporting. The next crate was different. It was heavier and made of stronger metal. They needed to work together to lift the lid, their muscles straining under the weight. When it finally opened, the contents were astonishing. Inside were artifacts that seemed ancient, with carvings and designs unlike anything the team had seen. Some were small enough to hold in one hand, others large and imposing. The carvings were intricate, almost hypnotic, and the materials were unlike anything they could identify. It was clear these were not ordinary objects. They had been deliberately hidden for their value, their rarity, or perhaps their power. He picked up one of the artifacts, feeling the smoothness of the stone and the weight of history in his hands. It was strangely warm, almost alive, as if it remembered the people who had touched it before. He showed it to the rest of the team, who reacted with awe. Each artifact seemed to carry its own energy, its own story. They realized that the train had been more than a transport vehicle. It had been a guardian of secrets, a vessel carrying items that someone had gone to great lengths to hide. As they continued, the team discovered more items that made their hearts race: old maps detailing territories that were long forgotten, books with delicate pages filled with writing in languages that no one alive could read, instruments designed for purposes they could only guess at. Each new discovery deepened the sense of mystery. It was as if the train had been a mobile museum, carrying treasures and knowledge that someone wanted to protect from the world. The question that hung over them was clear: why? And who? The biologist, usually focused on plants and animals, began examining a small box of preserved specimens. They were perfectly intact, almost as if frozen in time. He muttered quietly about the care that must have gone into preserving them, about the knowledge that had been lost to the jungle over the decades. The team realized that the train had not only carried objects of value but also knowledge, information that could have changed the way people understood history, science, and the natural world. The thought made them both excited and uneasy. They were standing in the middle of something extraordinary, something no one else had ever seen. As the hours passed, the team explored each crate methodically, documenting everything. They took photographs, wrote notes, and carefully handled each artifact, mindful that one wrong move could destroy decades of preservation. The carriage was filled with a sense of purpose and reverence. It was clear that the people who had packed these items had treated them as sacred, and now the team felt the same responsibility. Every discovery was a window into a story that had been deliberately hidden, and the weight of that responsibility was heavy on their shoulders. Then, they came across a crate unlike any other. It was small but heavily reinforced, and it bore no markings at all. They exchanged uneasy glances. The guide suggested caution, warning that some objects might be dangerous or unstable, but curiosity got the better of them. With care, they opened it. Inside was a collection of personal belongings: journals, photographs, and small trinkets. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but as they examined the items, a story began to emerge. These were the belongings of the people who had been on the train. Their faces stared out from faded photographs. Their handwriting detailed daily thoughts and plans. The team felt a lump in their throats. These were real lives, frozen in time, lives that had vanished without explanation decades ago. The journals were especially revealing. One in particular described the journey of the train in detail, noting stops that no one had ever heard of, cargo that was too valuable to disclose, and a growing sense of unease among the passengers and crew. The author wrote of strange occurrences, of shadows moving in the jungle, and of a feeling that they were being watched. The final entries were hurried and fragmented, leaving a chilling sense of urgency. The team read in silence, each word adding to the tension in the carriage. The train had been abandoned for a reason, and whatever had caused it to stop had left a mark on history. The afternoon sun had shifted, and the light inside the carriage became sharper, cutting through the dust in visible beams. They moved from crate to crate, uncovering more artifacts, more documents, more evidence of lives interrupted. It was exhausting work, both physically and emotionally. Each discovery brought excitement, but also a sense of weight. This was not just a collection of objects. It was a story of people, of history, of secrets deliberately kept from the world. The team felt a deep respect for what they were uncovering. They were not just explorers. They were witnesses to a forgotten chapter of human history. The biologist pointed out another unusual find, a collection of preserved plants and seeds, some of species thought extinct. The thought that the train had been carrying knowledge and life, safeguarding it from destruction, added another layer of significance. The train was more than a vehicle. It was a lifeline, a vessel of preservation, a guardian of history and science. They realized that the importance of the train extended far beyond its physical presence in the jungle. What they were uncovering could change the way people understood the past. As evening approached, the team decided to pause. They had made significant progress, but exhaustion was settling in, and the jungle outside was beginning to stir with nightfall. They lit a small fire in the corner of the carriage and ate quietly, reflecting on the day's discoveries. None of them spoke much. Words seemed inadequate to describe the experience of stepping into history, of touching objects that had been hidden for decades, of reading the thoughts of people long gone. The firelight flickered across their faces, illuminating both excitement and the weight of responsibility. That night, sleep came fitfully. The forest outside the train seemed more alive than ever. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and the wind whispered through broken windows, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. The team dreamed of the artifacts, of the stories trapped inside the crates, and of the people whose lives had been interrupted so long ago. He awoke multiple times, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the journey ahead. The final carriage, the heart of the train, still held secrets that they had not yet uncovered. And he knew that the next day would reveal something even more extraordinary. By dawn, the team was ready to continue. They had uncovered enough to understand that the train was more than abandoned. It was a repository of knowledge, history, and human lives. The jungle had hidden it for decades, but now it was waking, revealing its treasures to those willing to face the mystery. Each step they took deeper into the carriage brought them closer to answers, but also to questions they could not yet imagine. The anticipation was electric, the sense of discovery overwhelming. As they carefully approached the last row of crates, a sense of awe and nervousness settled over them. The day promised answers, revelations, and possibly dangers they could not foresee. They were explorers in the purest sense, stepping into a story decades in the making, bearing witness to secrets long hidden by the jungle and by time itself. The journey had begun with curiosity, but it was evolving into something far greater, an encounter with history, mystery, and the weight of human lives frozen in time. The team had spent days exploring the train, uncovering objects, journals, and artifacts that told stories long forgotten. Yet the sense of anticipation had never been stronger. The last carriage, the one reinforced and untouched by the jungle, remained closed to them, its secrets waiting. They knew that what lay inside could be extraordinary, and perhaps dangerous, but curiosity had driven them this far, and nothing could make them turn back now. They gathered their gear, double-checking flashlights, ropes, and tools. Each of them felt the tension thick in the air, a mixture of fear and excitement. The forest outside was calm in the early morning light, almost as if it were giving them permission to open the carriage. With slow, deliberate movements, they approached the heavy metal door. The handle was cold and unyielding, and it took several attempts to twist it without forcing it too hard. Finally, with a long, groaning creak, the door swung open. The first thing that hit them was the darkness. Their flashlights cut through it, revealing the outline of the objects inside. The air was heavier here, thicker with dust and a faint metallic smell. The carriage was filled with crates and containers, each carefully arranged, some stacked higher than a person. They could see markings, some faded, others bold, warning of fragility, secrecy, or danger. Every step they took echoed through the metal walls, making the space feel larger, almost cavernous. The team moved carefully, documenting everything as they went. The first crates contained more artifacts, ancient tools, delicate ornaments, and objects made from materials they could not identify. Each item seemed deliberately placed as if the people who had packed this train wanted the world to remain unaware of its contents. They marveled at the craftsmanship, the intricate details, and the sheer age of the objects. The thought that these items had been untouched for decades in the middle of the jungle was almost impossible to comprehend. Then they reached a set of crates that were different. These were reinforced with extra metal and showed signs of careful sealing, as if they contained something far more important than the artifacts around them. The guide hesitated, his expression serious. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Some things are hidden for a reason." The warning made everyone pause, their hearts beating faster. What could be so valuable, so dangerous that it required this level of protection? With extreme caution, they began opening the first reinforced crate. The metal was heavy, the lock stubborn, but teamwork and patience won. Inside, they found objects that left them speechless. Ancient ceremonial items, strange carvings, and relics that seemed to radiate an energy they could not explain. Some were delicate, others large and imposing. They examined each piece, taking photographs and notes, careful not to touch anything more than necessary. It was clear that these objects had been hidden deliberately, not just for protection but for secrecy. One of the items caught his attention immediately. It was a small, intricately carved box made from a dark, dense wood. The carvings depicted figures that seemed almost alive, frozen in mid-motion. Inside, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, were several small items. Coins, trinkets, and what appeared to be a fragment of an ancient manuscript. He held the manuscript gently, feeling the texture of the paper and the faded ink. There was something almost magnetic about it, as if it were calling him to understand its story. The team discovered other items of similar significance, scrolls that appeared to contain lost knowledge, tools for purposes they could not fully comprehend, and objects that suggested advanced understanding of engineering and materials far beyond what they had expected. The realization hit them all at once. This train had been carrying knowledge and artifacts so rare, so carefully preserved, that the world had no idea they even existed. Whoever had organized this shipment had gone to extreme lengths to keep it hidden. As they continued, they found crates filled with personal belongings of the passengers and crew. Old clothes, photographs, and journals revealed the human side of the story. These were real people, living lives suddenly interrupted, caught up in something far larger than themselves. The journals were fragmented, full of hurried notes and cryptic entries. Some wrote of fear, of shadows moving in the jungle, of strange noises at night, of a sense that they were being watched. It became clear that the train had not been abandoned randomly. Something had caused panic, something that forced the passengers and crew to flee or disappear. The air in the carriage felt heavier as they pieced together the story. This was not just a train filled with valuable objects. It was a vessel of secrets, carrying knowledge, artifacts, and the remnants of lives caught in the crossfire of history. Each new discovery was more astonishing than the last. They realized that the train had been intentionally hidden in the jungle, preserved by both human effort and nature itself. Whoever had placed it here had meant for it to remain untouched, waiting for the right moment or the right people to find it. Hours passed, and the team moved cautiously from crate to crate, uncovering objects that seemed to defy explanation. Ancient artifacts, rare documents, and preserved specimens hinted at civilizations long forgotten, and knowledge that could change the way people understood history. They marveled at the attention to detail, the care taken to preserve each item. The train was more than a vessel. It was a library, a museum, and a time capsule all in one. Then they found something that stopped them in their tracks. At the very back of the carriage, hidden behind a set of reinforced crates, was a small compartment. Its door was smaller than the rest, almost unnoticeable. But the team could see that it had been carefully concealed. The guide stepped forward, his face tense. "This is where it gets serious," he said softly. "Whatever is inside this compartment, it was meant to be hidden at all costs." He reached out, his hand steady despite the tension. The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a soft click. The door swung open, revealing a space barely large enough to step into. Inside were objects unlike anything they had seen. Crates contained rare artifacts, ceremonial items, and documents that seemed to hold secrets about people, places, and events the world had long forgotten. Some objects radiated an aura of importance, delicate and fragile, yet undeniably powerful. The air felt charged, almost alive, as if the items themselves were aware that they had been discovered. The team worked in silence, carefully documenting everything. Each discovery added pieces to the puzzle. The train had been transporting items of cultural, historical, and scientific significance. There were fragments of ancient maps, manuscripts written in languages no longer spoken, and artifacts that suggested advanced knowledge of technology and craftsmanship. It was clear that the train had been more than a means of transport. It had been a guardian, carrying items too valuable, too dangerous, or too secret for the world to know. One artifact in particular drew his attention. It was a small carved figurine, intricate and delicate, yet exuding a presence that was almost tangible. As he held it, he felt a strange warmth, a sense of connection to something beyond himself. It was as if the artifact carried a story, a memory, or a warning. The realization struck him. This train had been hidden not just for protection, but to preserve a legacy, a history that someone had feared the world was not ready to understand. As the day drew to a close, the team paused to reflect on what they had uncovered. They had spent hours in the carriage, documenting artifacts, reading journals, and piecing together the story of the train and its passengers. Each discovery added layers to the mystery, revealing a network of history, culture, and human lives intertwined with secrecy and danger. The forest outside seemed to watch over them, quiet and imposing, as if approving of their careful exploration. That night, they set up camp inside the last carriage, closer than ever to the train's most guarded secrets. The fire they lit illuminated the space softly, casting long shadows across the walls. The forest outside was alive with nocturnal sounds, but inside the carriage, the team was wrapped in a cocoon of discovery and reverence. Sleep came fitfully, each of them dreaming of the artifacts, the journals, and the mysteries they had uncovered. They awoke with renewed determination, knowing that the next steps could reveal even more extraordinary secrets. By morning, they were ready to continue. The train had given them a glimpse of the hidden world it protected, but the full story was still waiting. They could feel it just beyond reach in the last, most secret spaces of the carriage. Every artifact, every journal, every object was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that spanned decades, cultures, and forgotten histories. The team knew that what they were uncovering could change everything people thought they knew about the past, and they were determined to follow the trail to its end. As they prepared to explore deeper into the carriage, they realized that the train had become more than a discovery. It had become a responsibility. The artifacts, the knowledge, the human stories, they all demanded respect, care, and attention. The team moved forward with purpose, knowing that each step brought them closer to understanding the shocking truth hidden within this abandoned train, deep in the Amazon. The morning light filtered softly through the broken windows of the train, casting a golden glow across the dust-filled air. After days of exploring, uncovering artifacts, journals, and hidden knowledge, the team was closer than ever to understanding the train's story. The last carriage had revealed almost everything, but some of the most important pieces of the puzzle still waited, tucked away in crates and compartments that had been hidden for decades. Every step they took felt heavy with anticipation, as if the air itself knew what was about to be revealed. They began by examining the final crate in the carriage. Unlike the others, it was small, almost unassuming, but the metal was thick and the lock had been reinforced multiple times. The guide paused, giving a silent warning. Whatever was inside this crate had been hidden for a reason, and the forest seemed to hold its breath as they carefully pried it open. The lid groaned under the effort, but when it finally swung back, the team was met with objects unlike anything they had seen before. Inside were items of unmistakable historical significance, ancient manuscripts, delicate ceremonial objects, and intricate carvings made from rare materials. Some of the manuscripts were written in languages that had been lost to time, while others contained diagrams and instructions for techniques that were centuries ahead of anything known today. As they lifted each item carefully, documenting every detail, it became clear that the train had been carrying knowledge deliberately hidden from the world. Whoever had organized this shipment had understood its importance and had taken extraordinary steps to protect it. The weight of what they were discovering pressed on everyone. These were not just objects, they were fragments of history, knowledge, and culture preserved through decades of secrecy. The team felt a deep sense of responsibility. They were not merely explorers. They were witnesses to a story that had been waiting for discovery. Each artifact, each manuscript, each delicate carving was a link to a past that had been almost entirely erased by time and circumstance. One of the items stood out above the rest. It was a small, intricately carved box that seemed to hum with energy, though no one could explain why. The carvings depicted figures in motion, almost lifelike, and symbols that none of them could fully decipher. Inside, carefully wrapped in soft cloth, were several small objects, coins, trinkets, and fragments of what appeared to be an ancient manuscript. He held the manuscript gently, feeling the texture of the paper and the faded ink. There was a strange sense of connection, almost as if the artifact itself were urging him to understand its story. The journals they had discovered in other crates were particularly revealing. One, written by a passenger who had been responsible for part of the cargo, detailed the journey in meticulous, sometimes frantic entries. The author wrote of strange occurrences along the route, of shadows in the jungle, and of a growing sense of fear among the crew. The last entries were hurried, incomplete, and left a chilling sense of urgency. It became clear that the train had been abandoned because of events the passengers could not explain, events that forced them to leave the cargo behind. The forest had claimed it, preserving it from human interference until now. Hours passed as they carefully cataloged the contents of the last crate and the surrounding compartments. Each item added another layer to the mystery. Maps showed territories long forgotten. Drawings suggested knowledge lost to time, and artifacts revealed advanced craftsmanship that seemed far ahead of what historians believed existed during that period. The train had been more than a mode of transport. It had been a mobile vault, protecting cultural treasures, historical knowledge, and human lives from disappearing entirely. As they worked, the forest outside seemed almost to lean in. The usual sounds quieted as if nature itself were observing. The team moved slowly and deliberately, mindful of both the fragile artifacts and the weight of history around them. The guide occasionally pointed out small details, a carved symbol on the wall, a subtle marking on a crate, that suggested the original packers had taken great care to hide the most important items. Every discovery deepened their awe and sense of responsibility. By midday, they had uncovered nearly everything in the last carriage. The team gathered together to reflect, sitting amid the crates and artifacts, the air heavy with dust and sunlight. They realized that the significance of their find extended far beyond the train itself. These items had been deliberately hidden to protect knowledge, to safeguard history, and perhaps even to prevent powerful information from falling into the wrong hands. The train had been a guardian, and now they were its temporary stewards. The realization that they were holding history in their hands was both thrilling and humbling. Each artifact carried a story, each manuscript a voice from the past. They began discussing the implications of their discovery. How had these items come to be hidden in the jungle? Why had they been abandoned and preserved for decades? And most importantly, what should be done with them now that they had been found? The questions were complex and there were no easy answers. But one thing was clear: the world had been waiting for this discovery. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the carriage, they carefully packed the items they had examined. The goal was to preserve them as they had been found, ensuring that nothing was damaged in the process. They moved with the care of people handling priceless treasures, aware that even a single mistake could destroy decades of preservation. Every movement was deliberate, every touch intentional, and the sense of responsibility was palpable. That night they camped inside the train once more. The forest outside was alive with sounds, but inside the carriage, the team felt a quiet reverence. They spoke softly, sharing thoughts on the day's discoveries and the stories behind the artifacts. Sleep came fitfully, each team member dreaming of the passengers, the hidden cargo, and the journey that had been interrupted so long ago. They woke before dawn, eager to continue documenting and understanding the full story of the train. The following days were spent carefully removing, cataloging, and photographing each artifact and manuscript. They documented everything in detail, noting the position of each item, the markings on the crates, and any clues about their origins. The journals provided context, telling the story of a train journey interrupted by unknown circumstances, leaving treasures behind in a forest that had kept them safe. The team worked methodically, balancing excitement with the need for care. News of their discovery eventually had to leave the forest. Satellite images and initial photographs were sent to researchers and historians around the world. Experts marveled at what the team had found. The artifacts were of tremendous cultural and historical value, some items older than anyone had expected, and others suggesting knowledge previously thought lost. The manuscripts revealed glimpses of forgotten civilizations and scientific understanding that challenged modern assumptions. The world began to take notice, and soon, the abandoned train in the Amazon became the subject of fascination and study. For the team, the impact of the discovery was deeply personal. They had entered the jungle seeking adventure and mystery, but they emerged having uncovered history, knowledge, and human stories long forgotten. Each of them felt changed by the experience. They had witnessed the preservation of culture and life, and the responsibility of sharing that with the world weighed heavily on them. The train had been hidden for decades, but now, finally, it could tell its story.